It's time to talk to Washington's most feared and fearless reporter, the woman who knows what is happening from the White House to K Street. And if you're unfamiliar with DC, it's just around the corner from each other. Tara Palmeri joins us over from Puck News and the host of Somebody's Gotta Win. Tara, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know, Tara, first of all, I love that. That's in your bio. You are the most feared and fearless woman over there in news, everything reporting. I think it's great because there's a lot to get to with what's happening in DC. And I also want to cover some of the stuff you've been talking about on your pod with the GOP and some of the things we've been talking about here on this pod and I've been mentioning on TV. But first and foremost, let's start with the latest of what you're hearing out in Capitol Hill, because, you know, this government shutdown thing, it's been looming for months. It keeps getting punted to the next month. And the main focal points of why it keeps getting punted is around Ukraine funding and what's happening at the border. And we know the political football and environment right now of what those two topics entail. So what is it that you're hearing right now about, will the government get funded further past this? And then the two stalemate issues in terms of Ukraine funding and the border.
I'm sure the government will continue to be funded. They keep using these continuing resolutions, which are just like short-term funding bills. And that's sort of how they get by saying it's a stopgap measure. It's just a short-term funding bill until we get to the real funding bill. It's sort of pushing everything off for another day. And we've been doing that for years. It's crazy, right? But as long as Republicans are in power and the chambers are split, this is just what we have and what we're going to deal with. In terms of the Ukraine funding bill with the border, I think that every day, the more and more details come out, the more it looks like it's dead on arrival, especially because President Trump has already voiced his opposition to it. He's now the presumptive nominee of the party. A lot of the members feel beholden to his position, especially the rightward flank. It gives them even more political will and to try to stop the Speaker of the House from putting the floor on the bill. I'm talking about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, who can threaten, if you put this bill on the floor for a vote, because Democrats will vote for it and some Republicans, and it will pass, we will trigger a motion to vacate, the same thing they used against McCarthy, which ultimately ended his, speakership. So there's a lot riding on that. Mike Johnson obviously is not only an ambitious person who probably wants to keep his job, but he's also a member of that same group, right-leaning, at one time was called the Freedom Caucus. Now it's MAGA Republicans. And he's not, he does not want to alienate that part of the party and doesn't want to alienate the leader of the party, Trump. And that was pretty much solidified last week when he won the New Hampshire primary.
You know, we were talking about it in the first segment before you hopped on about the border and the crisis at large, which is really around the impact that folks are feeling it from the CBP perspective, from ICE, from the immigration courts. It's felt all the way on down. And so it begs the question of, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this. And again, you and I are both, in the DC throes of politics, but is it just as simple from the outsider perspective, somebody listening to this show, is it as simple as, hey, there is a solution in place, but these House Republicans really don't want to solve this problem? Because nobody has solved the problem of the border over 30 years, right? They just keep punting the football like we talked about the continuing resolution.
Right.
It's simple to people that are watching it that these lawmakers are like caricatures of themselves. They just don't want to solve this problem. They know that coming up in November, they want to get into power. Is it that simple? Or is there, no, you know what, Mike, there actually is something else here to it?
Well, I understand why some of the Republicans are unhappy with the bill. It basically allows 5,000 people to cross the border and request asylum before Biden can essentially stop the asylum processing. He can effectively close off the border. And some people might say, well, 5,000 people a day is still a lot, right? It's a pretty big number of people. And so I understand why Republicans, especially those on the border states like Ted Cruz, et cetera, like they're going to say, no, unacceptable. We don't want to process another asylum seeker. And if you live in those states, they do feel the influx and the overwhelm. And even people in the northern, even people up north, New York, Chicago, where a lot of these migrants were transported by Southern governors like Texas Governor Greg Abbott. they also are now complaining that they're at capacity trying to, accommodate this new influx of people. It's a huge crisis. And a lot of Republicans are just saying it's not good enough, right? But I think it's a step, it's a step in the right direction. And it's a matter of, do they want to take this step in the right direction? That would be a win for Joe Biden, although it would not completely seal off the border. And it would, that's the question. Now, it's also a win for the Democrats too, because I mean, for a very long time, they didn't want to go near border politics, right? Democrats did not want to alienate their progressive base by suggesting that they would even stop asylum seekers or crossings. But they've realized that if they want to win in the 7 or so battleground states that matter, in the swing states, they're going to need to attack this kind of politically unpopular issue with their left base, because it's both Democrats and Republicans are naming migration at the top of their concerns when they go to the ballot box. So I kind of see it from both angles. I do think it's worse. I think Republicans are playing even more political. They're using this as a wedge issue. I think they're using it as a cudgel political weapon. But Democrats wouldn't be doing this either if it wasn't an election year and the polling resoundingly showed that their own party, or at least the voters that they need to win, which are probably soft Republicans, some of them, want this.
So well said.
They've had a chance to fix that migration for a long time as well.
You are feeding into these follow-ups perfectly, because the previous segment we mentioned about, there was a poll in 2017, 12% of Democrats, I believe it was, that were surveyed felt like immigration was a huge issue. Now 32%. There was a poll as well about President Biden handling of the border. 27% supported, whereas double support former President Trump's handling of the border. So I want to pivot real quick into President Biden and the campaign, because what are some things that you're hearing from voters or even folks close to the campaign for President Biden as they get ready? We're going to get into who's going to be the front runner on the GOP side, although we probably already know. But what are you hearing about how they're going to message around some of these issues to voters as the South Carolina primary is coming up this week? We get into the throes of it right now, and the president's got to go out there and run on his record. And he's got a very low approval, according to Gallup, at 37% over the past 18 months. What are you hearing from folks about what the president should be saying about some of these issues that have come home to roost, unfortunately, even some that are not of his own doing?
It's like, yes, the economy is not great for him right now. He's not polling well, even though they can argue that they stopped a recession, but people don't tend to vote based on the fact that you stopped something from happening, right? Although, stocks are up, Dow's up, people are starting to feel more enthused. So who knows, a year from now, maybe they'll feel like they'll give credit to Biden for that. But they were feeling the pains of inflation for a long time. Some people still are, supply chain issues, et cetera. Migration, again, top of mind. Pocketbook issues are always top of mind. Biden is a more conservative leader for a Democrat, and so that's why he plays well in South Carolina rather than some of these other states, like, where the progressive base is very strong, like Iowa, New Hampshire. And that's why they changed the calendar so that South Carolina, the first nominating state for Democrats, would be a strong showing in support for Biden. He's got to go in there and continue to, talk about his message on the economy. And now he has something else to talk about if they pass this migration bill, that he helped to stave off some of the migration. But he's kept a lot of the same Trump era policies in place in terms of the border, like Title IX. And he's admitted, like, there is a problem at the border. There's no doubt about that. It's something, and when you're the president, they blame you. That's how it works, So they've got to deal with this issue before the election. And I just think there's a question of competence and in Joe Biden, and fairly or unfairly, it's because of his age.
Right.
And that's a big part of what the polls are showing us. A number of people think he's too old to run for president. 2/3 of his party think that. That's distressing. Now, the question is, are they going to go out and vote for him? Are they going to, so that President Trump will not be the nominee, or will they stay home? And then what about the people who are going to vote in protest to him for third party candidates like Cornel West or Jill Stein, because maybe they're unhappy with how he's handling the war in Israel. They think, they think he's too pro-Israel. And those people they might either not come out and vote for third parties. And those are people that Biden would need. Even just a few thousand votes, they matter in these swing states. Just ask Hillary Clinton about Michigan and Pennsylvania in 2016. So it's the votes, every vote matters, and it's going to be such a nail biter of an election that they're pulling on every issue.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. Are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details.
Well, I want to promote something that you're doing around the primaries and the election, which is your great show called Somebody's Gotta Win. You can go check it out over on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, because you've been covering a lot of the GOP race, DeSantis dropping, Nikki Haley's still in it. So let's do the first thing first. Let's stay on the GOP side. I've been on recent segments talking about Nikki Haley's chances, and I look at it more from the map and the analytics around it, right? New Hampshire is a very college-educated populace, 40% undeclared, undecided, whatever word they want to use to describe those folks. And not that many of them came out in support of Nikki Haley, where she lost by 12 percentage points. Now, she lost by 21 percentage points in Iowa. So is the trend swinging her direction? Who knows? What says you, as you've been covering this? I know you've had different folks on the ground in both states covering this, and it's just the first two in terms of caucus and primaries. But what do you think is a realistic chance, as we get into Nevada, South Carolina, Michigan here in February, that Nikki Haley can actually do something and make it to Super Tuesday, where 19 other states will vote and have some more open primaries? Or is this thing over and we know it and we're just kind of, running out the clock here?
That's a good question. I do not see the pathway for her forward. Her team thinks if she gets to Super Tuesday, she can win some more of the moderate states, Michigan, et cetera. I don't know. I don't think she's going to win South Carolina. It's her home state. And if she gets really crushed by Trump, there's a very strong argument that she shouldn't stay in the race anymore. But at the same time, people close to her donors, those around her, think this person has a lot of legal issues. He's an older man. Anything can happen. Why not stay in the race for as long as possible? Just as an insurance policy, essentially. Question is, does the insurance policy lose so badly that even being an insurance policy does not seem to be, appropriate for the voters? And she has to win delegates. You can't win the nomination without delegates. Even if he has legal problems, even if he's convicted, he can still run for president. He has the delegates. It just, the numbers don't really add up. I don't see all the states that she could win that would make her the winner unless he drops out of the race. And I don't see a scenario in which Trump drops out of the race. I think Trump is running because of his legal problems. I don't think he's running. I don't think the legal problems would keep him out in any way.
I did want to ask you, now let's shift. Let's say Trump does become the presumptive nominee. Both men alive and healthy, even though they're both, one's 80, and by the time 2028 comes around, they'll both be in their early 80s to mid. So now we got a rematch of where 60% of Americans say they don't want this. Your show's appropriately titled Somebody's Gotta Win, almost as if we have to give this to somebody. So what says a host of a show begging for somebody to win, even though 2/3 of Americans don't want this rematch? What do we make of it?
The show isn't about begging. It's more about, it's reflective of the feeling of the country right now, which I think no one's really too enthused about the options that we have. But somebody's got to win. And I think that's really more what I'm trying to reflect. I think there's a sort of malaise, even tune out of the media, disinterest, feeling like, is this the best that America has? and how did we get here? But ultimately, your vote matters, especially in a tight election like this. And yes, somebody's got to win, no matter what, no matter what you think. I mean, and staying home is not exercising democracy, right? And you might not be happy if you stay at home with the results. So yeah, it's kind of, somebody's got to win reflects, I think, the feeling in our country. I don't sense like it was 2008 again, where there was real enthusiasm around Obama. Like, even if it was just Obama, but even the right was enthused by Sarah Palin for a minute. They were really energized by her. She kicked off the Tea Party movement. So it's sort of, there was more enthusiasm about politics at that time. Now we're in a malaise. Right. And I think especially for younger voters who maybe don't remember 2008, and they're probably just thinking, what's going on here? Why is, why are we in this place? And in some ways I kind of think, like, where the hell are like the old millennials right now stepping up? Why don't we have more Pete Buttigieg's? Like, why don't we have more people like that trying to take the crown, and why do we think that these two flawed candidates are the best that we've got? And where, like, it used to be that people like grabbed power and now they sort of cede it, but maybe they think that the machine is too big and too strong after all these years in which they were able to pick their candidates. Even now, the Democratic National Committee moving the calendar to make sure that Biden did not have a primary. It just shows you that, like, I think people are demoralized. They're like, wait a minute, the National Party can stop a nominating process essentially and have it benefit the person in power? How does that feel fair?
Right. Dean Phillips is complaining about that? Yep.
Exactly. And on the Republican side as well. I mean, right. How can the RNC say, you know what, we're going to call, they tried to last week say, we're just going to call Trump the nominee. How is that a nominating process? He hasn't won yet.
No, he has not.
He still has a contender. Exactly. He doesn't have the delegates.
Tara, it's almost as if I gave you these questions because you're funneling into these follow-ups perfectly. I did not give her the questions, but I did. You mentioned there about malaise and mistrust of the media. I live in Miami here, so I hear it
Lucky
a lot.
You, by the way. I'm freezing up here.
Oh, well, sorry. I'll send you some more warm weather up there. I say I was warm when I went up there last week, but I hear it around down here. And the reason why we started this show was because I'm a former Fox News producer, and I wanted to kind of like, hey, I know what that side sounds like. Let's get some more centrist and subject matter experts. Let's get back to people who know what they're talking about. And people are finding information in different ways. I just mentioned your show and specifically what you guys do over at Puck News. You guys have been able to kind of cut out your own market in this big three media of cable news that is kind of not necessarily dying, although the linear side is dying, but it's revolutionized now because there are other avenues and outlets that people are listening to, including this podcast. So I would love what do you think of the future of journalism? Are we just going to see more and more people that used to work at these traditional powerhouses just start their own Substacks, their own podcasts? Like, what's the new wave of like how people can get information and not be led down the path of misinformation? And then how does Tara consume news? How would she recommend it to somebody out there that's listening to this podcast?
That's a really great question. I think a lot of journalists have decided to become more entrepreneurial. That's how I would describe it. I worked at ABC News. I worked at Politico. I worked as a contributor for CNN. And, at some point as a journalist, like, you realize you have built a brand yourself and people trust you, and they, and you can sort of, you can form a personal connection with your listenership, your readership, in a way that, like, it's hard to build inside of a larger organization sometimes, unless you are given the column or given the show. And, so in some ways I'm kind of going out and making it myself, and instead of kind of waiting to climb up the ladder, I guess you could say, right? And it just so happens that in this media environment, people want different voices. They want to, maybe you can go around the media executives per se and go straight to the audience and see if they want to hear what you have to say. They trust your reporting. If they know you and are and find you to be valuable. If there's a freedom to it, it's like being your own boss. You know what I mean? It's like working at a big company and then going on to start your own. And I think that's sort of the trend right now in media, especially as you've seen so many layoffs. Journalists are the media business is suffering. Puck has a very unique model that puts the talent first. Because you do see this at a lot of these organizations. Like New York Times has like a few star reporters and they're just killing it. You know what I mean? And they almost like drive all of the traffic. Not all of it, but they drive a big part of the traffic to into the New York Times. Some could argue they could start their own organizations themselves. I think there are pros and cons to both sides, and I've decided to try this other side after doing the more traditional media route. I don't think I could have never started this way. I don't think. Maybe some people have, and they've been extremely successful, especially some of these news TikTok stars. But I do think having learned reporting standards from traditional media, it sort of set me up too in a lot of ways. And I picked what I like and what I don't. And I still go on CNN. I still go on, MSNBC. I'm still a contributor to the networks, but there's a freedom to it as well. Being at Puck. Puck's amazing. I mean, we're reporters digging in, trying to get the scoop. I think we all are, and we offer our reporting and analysis. And I think it's kind of nice to be a small cadre of journalists who kind of don't step on each other's toes. There's not as much politics. Like we do our jobs and we move on. It's a really special thing.
Yeah. No, I love what you guys.
My colleagues a lot. I really do.
I love what you guys do. You can check out all of Tara's work over at puck.news. She's a senior political correspondent over there. Go listen to her podcast, Somebody's Gotta Win. Listen to her wherever you get your pods. Tara, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. Continued success to you, and please stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me on, Mike. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.